Martial World Teyvat Chapter 38, Fan Fiction by Azazyel. Keqing covered up her chest with her hands as the door for my cultivation pod swung open with the blinding mist of condensed spiritual energy billowing out, with Ganyu and Yelan giving some odd noises of discontent as Shenhe carefully strode into the pod and over our legs to sit beside me closer to the wall. Then I pulled the door closed, with the spiritual energy density quickly rising back up as Keqing shifted on my lap as she resumed her cultivation, while I just acclimated myself to having reached the first levels of cultivation and martial arts. Alright, so my golden path cultivation style is more than good enough, as it can go all the way to the start of the divine stages basically. Plenty of time for me to find a gold or earth style more offensive cultivation art to supplement it like Ningguang did. I thought before I reflected on my martial arts, and grimaced at the lack of them to help me in true body refining. My thoughts, however, were cut off as I felt Shenhe's bared hip touching the side of my chest, as I myself, like Keqing, had removed my top so we could have plenty of skin contact to take advantage of my physique. And as her hip touched my side, I felt her shiver before she stilled. And then she spoke in some intrigued amusement. Merely touching a few inches of your skin increases my cultivation speed by more than half. Master was right about your potential. My lips twitched at that, and then my face went stock still as Keqing said arrogantly. Humph, merely touching with a finger upon my man increases your speed by more than half. While within my man's embrace my speed is increased by more than 5 times, not even including this environment. There was a moment of silence before Shenhe shifted in the darkness as though she wasn't sure what to do. She wanted to cultivate faster, she wanted to touch me to enhance her cultivation. But she wasn't dumb nor that socially inept. She knew, I was Keqing's lover and shouldn't be trying to have a bunch of her body against mine. But then the speaking hole opened up again, with Yelan speaking within with almost a whine in her voice. Jake! You bastard, why didn't you tell me the lever controlled the room's spiritual energy density? I was stuck on the room's lowest setting. At this point, with Keqing acting as a filter for the spiritual energy, I could withstand a lot more, along with having gained both the first level in cultivation and martial arts. With the spiritual energy being a more benign form of radiation to my scientific knowledge, I could say bluntly. You never asked, Yelan. Even as I could literally feel her pout as the spiritual energy leaked into the opposite room, I just rolled my eyes before Keqing spoke with a huff. Shenhe, your mental gymnastics are all but audible to mine self. Either curl up into a lotus position or just lean into Jake. I gave Keqing a squeeze around her waist as though to ask her what the hell she was thinking. And in turn, I felt her key enter my ears with her voice coming to my attention. Shenhe is one of Lady Cloud Retainer's muscle-headed martial artist and cultivation dual-path disciples. The only thing she has on her mind is the path of power in front of her and her pride in her own skill and master. After a moment her voice continued. Just play along so you can cultivate faster. But no kissing her. I will not accept any shameless concubines before we marry Jake. And I could only think. The fuck you mean concubines? I literally only saw her today. But in reality, I wasn't stupid. I knew Liyue was very much in a feudal era of Chinese culture, and any man of power, who owned large amounts of land, who had actual power in military matters, would have a main wife, side wives, and then a harem of concubines. So knowing that Keqing was raised in this culture, and having her own thoughts on how our relationship was supposed to go, including me having such concubines due to cultural stigma, as me not having such women would be seen as being impotent or unable to take care of such women, I was wisely going to not gainsay her, and just love her all the same. Even as I took a breath and as Shenhe shifted again, I moved one arm from Keqing's waist and nudged Shenhe's silk-covered arm that was sticking to her flesh due to how damp and misty it was in the room. Yes, Jake? Shenhe asked after a moment, and for a moment I hesitated before I mentally shrugged. And replied calmly. Your hip is basically the only thing exposed in your outfit, maybe we can hold dash. I was about to say we could just hold hands, but Keqing cut me off as she continued. Yes, just take off your battle suit, so that you may cultivate faster. There wasn't a moment of hesitation before I heard the sounds of a dozen silk knots being untied in an instant before I felt the curvaceous form of Shenhe sliding behind me with her and Keqing scooching me forward, so with a literal plopping a noise. I felt Shenhe's large breasts plop onto my back as she firmly hugged me in a way that pushed as much body as she could against me, and I couldn't help a shiver at feeling my cultivation speed more than tripling once again due to the furnace of power that Shenhe was. Senior sister, this is just so wonderful. Shenhe all but moaned lightly as her own form shuddered against me. And I could hear Ganyu giving out a whine of exasperation before Yelan with mischievous intent asked. Ho! And how much are you touching him? How much faster are you cultivating? Though while Shenhe had to think for a second, I had a thought strike me. With how Ganyu was the descendant of a Yelan, a supernatural being of purity and benevolence who could sense evil. Was our lewd cuddling for warmth/cultivation too much for her senses? And my thoughts were answered as Shenhe with an almost giddy-like voice answered. The room right now has an average density of spiritual energy of more than 30 times the spiritual energy within Liu's city, as is expected with it being in mist form. And then with Jake acting as an amplifier, that density is being purified and multiplied by 5 times about with how much I am holding him. I felt Keqing shift in my arms, and then I realized that she and Shenhe must have been talking between themselves with their own spiritual/key-based messages. This makes me wonder, how the hell did Shenhe convince Keqing to agree to this, or did Keqing do this herself? But either way, I almost giggled as Yelan and Ganyu both spat out in clear jealousy at the resources within Shenhe's grasp. Hateful.